This is Bill Arnold conducting this interview on September 17th, 2023, from Harwich, Massachusetts. Mike, when we left off yesterday, we had completed your training in California prior to your deployment to Fallujah, Iraq. And what we're going to do in this particular interview is focus on your combat experience as well as your reacclimation back to the United States in 2005. So please, for a moment, please describe your billet assignment and responsibilities in Iraq.
Sure. So I was the first section leader for uh, scout platoon and acting platoon sergeant whenever the platoon sergeant wasn't around. And what scout platoon was initially, essentially responsible for is we were providing the personal security detail for the regimental commander. And what we were attempting to do, and I think we did well, was place him where he wanted to be on the battlefield so that he had the confidence uh, in our placement of him in order to prosecute the battle. So what I did was commanded first section, and ultimately we ended up running. There's two sections in a scout platoon. We ultimately ended up running split section ops, right? So first section we took on the commander's PSD, personal security detail, and second section essentially took on route security and they went hunting for IEDs. So I mean, horrible job right there, right? But our ultimate responsibility was to move him to where he wanted to go on the battlefield, keep him safe.
What do you remember about the commanding officer of RCT-1?
Colonel Mike Shupp, good. I liked him. He was a good dude, but he was super high energy. I mean, I've run into Fallujah vets that I didn't know during the Battle of Fallujah and met them later, and they would tell me that when he would come around, they would just freaking hide. I mean, they were terrified of the guy because of his high energy. But working so closely with him, I really liked the guy, and he seemed like me, and I found him quite personable, but just super high energy. I mean, never slept. So
Well, let's describe, before we get into the details of the battle, describe your living conditions aboard Camp Fallujah. Paint a word picture for those that weren't there. What was life like aboard the facility?
okay, so yeah, so once the battle began, we basically lived in a couple different spots in the city. But prior to the assault beginning, and we were just running missions in the areas around the city, we lived aboard Camp Fallujah. And Camp Fallujah was a fairly small, I would even call it it's a base, but I would even call it wasn't quite a, it was a little bit bigger than a FOB, a forward operating base, but somewhere in between a FOB and say a giant base like Al Assad. It was relatively close to Fallujah. It was definitely in bad guy country, so you sort of lived under constant threat of indirect fire from the bad guys. Uh, where we slept was in sort of corrugate, it's like corrugated metal trailers, if you will, and we were typically 3 to 4 to that trailer, 3 to 4 Marines. We had a ready room, which we lovingly called the Bat Cave, which we kind of took from the scout platoon that we relieved. And that's where we would do our mission briefs. We would, load our mags, get everything ready, get our gear squared away. And outside of the Bat Cave, there was a, gravel parking lot where all of our gun trucks were parked. So,
Do you do you feel like you understood that your mission prior to Operation Phantom Fury or Al Fajr, was it adequately explained to you in clear terms what the mission was and what you would be trying to accomplish?
yeah, it was pretty clear to me. I mean, and maybe I was the failure point, right? Because it came down from the officer above me, Major Arnold, as to what we were going to be doing on any given mission. And then it's up to me as the section leader, acting platoon sergeant, whatever, to push that information down. And so maybe I didn't do as good enough a job if any of the guys say they didn't understand it, but I certainly did. I thought it was pretty clear. The colonel wanted to go wherever we were going to take him. We were going to ensure that it was a safe um, movement for him. So it's pretty clear to me.
Did you understand the overall scheme of maneuver for the battle prior to its assault?
So that sort of came piecemeal, right? Because I don't even think that the regimental staff knew exactly how this was going to play out. I mean, everyone knew it was going to be bad. We just didn't know how bad until we got into the middle of it. So, what I mean by that is we were initially given marching orders that we were going to move into assault and take an area which was going to be the first forward CP called the apartment complex. I didn't know what was going to happen after that, but I knew that's where we were going, right? So it was very clear. I think the orders were given clearly.
Now you spent most of the battle inside a Humvee, correct?
No, I
I
wouldn't.
mean, you were mounted most of the time. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So Scout Platoon operated from up armored Humvees, factory up armored Humvees. We were some of the only ones in the city, if I remember correctly. Most of the units there were operating with what they lovingly called hillbilly armor, which was like thick steel that they had welded to the sides of, unarmored Humvees. So we were pretty much vehicle borne all the time. However, we had to clear a lot of buildings. We had to do a lot of regular infantry stuff. So anytime that would happen, one of my collateral duties was to be the dismount team leader. And so I would take the dismounts into whatever building we were clearing.
Yeah. Help us understand what your truck looked like, your Humvee. Walk us through. Try to conceptualize what that Humvee
Sure.
was like and what was in it and its capabilities.
Sure. Yeah. So I had a driver, Lance Corporal Matt Daniel, good dude, great driver. He's in the driver's seat as the vehicle commander and team leader. I'm in the front, what you would think of as the front passenger seat in a civilian vehicle. In between us, because we were a leadership tier vehicle, we had two tactical radios. If you were in any of the other team vehicles, you would just have one tactical radio in between the driver and passenger seat. In between us and about 3 feet to the rear is the gunner's platform. So my gunner, Lance Corporal Chris Jeans, was standing on this platform, and he was popped out of a turret and manning a 50 caliber machine gun. In the back seat, we had a couple, like both seats were actually clear so we could take on passengers or wounded or whatever the case was. But underneath the seats was extra supplies, lithium batteries. I mean, you name it, anything that you need to operate, right? Because all of your night vision stuff is going to operate off of lithium batteries. So we had a ton of lithium batteries, um, extra extra grenades. I almost said frags, slang term for grenade, but extra grenades. We had an AT4 that was slung across the back seats of the two back seats, and then past that, you've got the trunk. That's where all your personal gear is, all the packs, all the med kits, stuff like that. Extra ammunition.
Yeah, help us. Let's move on to the actual combat operations themselves. And I know that the Battle of Fallujah began the evening of the 7th of November when Task Force LAR assaulted the peninsula.
Right.
Uh, and your platoon, Scout Platoon, began its operations around 6:40 in the morning of November 8th. Help us understand what you remember about the very first time you left Camp Fallujah en route to the battle.
Sure. Everybody was pretty keyed up. I don't think anybody slept the night before. I know I didn't, because especially for us, like this was our first foray into combat. We were all untested and green. We didn't really know what combat was going to be like on that level. Certainly, we've had a few little skirmishes here and there in the patrols around the city prior to the assault, but we didn't really know what urban combat was yet. So everybody was pretty much on edge. You could feel it; it was palpable inside the vehicles. And I remember it was dark. There was a light rain that had started, and it just seemed like we were in line with a million other vehicles of every type that you can think of. And I remember at one point we passed a security berm that was kind of built to sort of shield vehicles and allow them to go um, on a route around the city, and the berm was there to protect from enemy incoming fire. I remember there were two uh, CAT vehicles, or combined anti-assault team vehicles, which are other Humvees with crew served weapons on them. up on the berm, firing down into the city as we kind of passed behind them on the way to our initial staging areas. So it was pretty surreal with the light rain coming down, it dark, it being dark, the cat vehicles firing into the blackness that I knew the city was right over there, and just knowing that it was finally on. We were going to go stage and get ready to go kick some heads in.
What were some emotions that went through your head, and also did you sense the emotions among your crew members?
So for me, I wasn't really ever scared, um, and certainly not at that time because we hadn't really been involved in much yet. But I was a little bit apprehensive. Like I'm in charge of these guys, and not just in my vehicle. I'm in charge of scout teams and two other vehicles, and plus a headquarters element vehicle. Am I going to get anyone killed? So I was thinking about that, just wanting to make sure that my head was screwed on tight so that I kept everybody alive if I could. I also had concern for the officer corps that we were toting around. I mean, one of them was our own Major Bill Arnold. I was concerned for his safety, um, but just general apprehension at that. We didn't have anything to react to yet, so it was kind of like waiting to see what was going to happen. My driver, you asked about the mood inside the vehicle. My driver, Matt Daniels, about the most unflappable person you'll ever meet. So I'm pretty sure he was just thinking he was out for a Sunday drive. Chris Jeans is a pretty tough SOB, and I'm pretty sure he was actually ready to get down there and hurt someone. So the mood was good in the vehicle, coupled with a little bit of apprehension is about the only way I can explain it.
Now, once you got into the assembly area, I don't know, it was mid morning, probably 8 or 9 a.m. What was it like waiting outside north of the city of Fallujah, waiting to approach? Do you recall what that felt like?
Yeah, there seemed to be a little bit of chaos, and that's understandable. I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you practice a large scale assault on a full fledged city, full of insurgents. There's people are going to screw up. So some vehicles were out of place from other units. They were getting mixed in with our vehicles. There was some shredded, I guess, old railing that still had like the prongs sticking out of the sand that we ran over, and so we popped a couple tires. So now you're changing tires while the rest of the column is pushing past, and you know the tracked vehicles like the Amtraks and the tanks are just tearing up the ground. So it was organized somewhat, but I would say it was like organized chaos. And then of course you had sporadic gunfire coming in from the city at us every once in a while, so that didn't help calm your nerves. But it was such a huge, massive moving of troops and equipment that it just seemed to be a little chaotic, I guess.
Now, as I understand it, the first operation was to seize the apartment complex north of the city.
Right.
What do you recall about that particular operation, the afternoon of November 8th?
So when we pushed into the apartment complex, what I remember was, I don't remember exactly which infantry unit it was, but I remember they were in the courtyards with us with their Amtraks, and we're in Humvee, so like we're gonna get crushed like a can of beans if you get in front of those things, right? They're huge vehicles. So I was just basically trying to get Colonel Shupp, Major Arnold, and the rest of the command staff in place where they wanted to be, and then get my vehicles out of the way, because the infantry guys were, the line units were using their tracks to like knock down walls, to access, knock holes in buildings. So it was pretty chaotic, and you didn't want to get in the way of one of those. You become squashed pretty quick. If I remember correctly, there was also a friendly IIF force, they were renamed 100 times while we were there, but Iraqi interim forces, the good guy Iraqis, they were helping clear some of the buildings, and I remember they seemed quite inept. They didn't really seem to know what they were doing, and I think a couple of them got shot. I think I remember seeing a couple of them get shot, and I wasn't sure that it was actually bad guys in the buildings that did it. I think it might have been friendly fire with the friend, the good guy Iraqis. So it was a little bit of a chaotic scene.
Okay, so the afternoon of November 8th into the evening, you were positioned in the apartment complex, correct?
Correct.
Now, help us understand what it was like waiting for the initial assault to clear the railroad tracks and move into the city. So take us through the time that you were waiting at the apartment complex until we actually, or say, you actually assaulted the city.
Right. So we had some crew serve weapons guys up on top of the buildings. And so the apartment complex sort of gave you a pretty good vantage point down into the city. So there were some crew serve weapon teams on the roofs. There were some of the snipers that were up there with their bolt guns, and they were pretty much just hammering the city at any target of opportunity that they could. It was pitch black out. The radios were going ape shit crazy. I mean, people were stepping on each other, talking. And again, I had two radios, so I had double the amount of audible chaos going on trying to listen for orders. And I remember there were air assets above that were working over certain areas of the city. At one point, we blew a breach lane into the railroad tracks so that we could get through. And if I remember correctly, or if I'm not mistaken, that was airdrop munitions that did that. I wasn't sure at the time whether it was that or engineers, but I think I've heard later that it was an air asset that did that. But it was again pretty chaotic. I mean, when you're joining a battle like this, you really don't get your you know into your groove, if you will, for a while, and so that's why the movement from Camp Fallujah was a little bit chaotic. The movement into the apartment complex was a little bit chaotic. The initial staging area was a little bit chaotic because there's just so many units and so many people and machines moving that it's pretty crazy. But after a couple days, you really smooth out and you get into your groove. So what I'm trying to do amidst all this chaos is I'm getting out of my vehicle and running around to the other scout vehicles to make sure that everybody has what they need, that they know what they're doing, that they know what's going on, because I can't get on the radio and talk to anybody because it's pretty crazy. So I'm just trying to organize my people in a way that at least subtracts from that chaos, if that makes sense.
Now, do you recall when you were actually given the order to make your way across the breach lane, and help us understand what that was like?
Well, initially, I was told because I was in charge of the dismounts, I was told to grab a couple dismounts, pack enough stuff for like 2 days in a smaller pack, and that we were going to walk down to the train station. That didn't happen, although I heard later that I believe Colonel Shupp went by himself down there. So then I was sent back to my vehicle. We weren't going on a foot patrol. And then I was called forward again, and I was told to take a bunch of chem lights and mark the breach lane after the tracks were destroyed with with chem lights, so that these vehicles could see in the dark what the lane was to get across the tracks and into the city proper. But I honest to goodness, I don't really remember exactly what the order was to cross into the city. I just remember we did it, and a lead was flying, and I want to say that it was almost light by the time we went across.
Now, once you got across, you're actually in Fallujah at this point.
Mm-hmm.
What now? What was day one like for you?
Well, we were all exhausted because no one had slept in like 2 days, and everyone was jittery because everyone's dipping Copenhagen like it's going out of style and drinking coffee. You're not drinking water. You're not eating food. You're not doing the things that you're supposed to do. You're just trying to figure out what in the hell is going on. The regular line units are pushing through about the first block. We are kind of back and forth between the train station and then wherever Colonel Shupp wanted to go to, the forward seam of the fighting. And I remember that a SNAP battalion aid station had been set up for the Iraqi guys, and maybe even some of our guys, but I just saw Iraqi guys that were shot to pieces back at the train station. And so anytime Colonel Shupp would go over to what position he wanted to on the forward edge of the fighting, and then he wanted to come back to the train station, which was sort of like our first little CP, if you will, right? Only lasted about a day. I just remember seeing bodies everywhere, and people working on some of these good guy Iraqis that were wounded. Gunfire was a constant. You could hear it in different parts of the city, but it was basically everywhere. You know, your ears could pick up any sound. You could hear explosions and gunfire. Um, it was a full on fight at that point. So, you know, if you're asking what I remember, I just remember everyone was shooting at everyone and everything.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. Describe your very first taste of battle. So I have two questions. One, help us understand what it was like for you to engage the enemy for the first time. And the second question is it what you expected? Is it what you thought it would be like?
Okay. So I'll answer number two first. No, it was not what I thought it was going to be like, because I thought it would have been a lot more scary. And this is something that I know a lot of other guys that have actually been in combat as well have experiences. I never experienced any fear. And that's not because I'm some superhero or anything like that. I'm certainly not. I experienced fear later. I was too busy doing my job and trying to make sure that my guys were kept alive during the moment of combat to actually have the ability to even feel fear. It was later in the quiet moments, like when a particular firefight was done, that you sit there and shake a little bit and you go, oh shit, that could have really gone bad. And that's when you start really thinking about how horribly that could have gone. For me, we were headed down a particular route, and I want to say, I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't remember the name of the route, but my platoon commander was in front of me, and he thought he had identified a sniper in a green building off to our left, but he couldn't be sure. So he said, hey, you know, Scout One, that was my call sign. Uh, I'm going to push forward one block, hold your position, and kind of keep an eye on that building. So I told my gunner, Jeans, hey, check out that building right there on our left. The sir thought that he might have seen a sniper in it. So, you know, watch out. Well, as Major Arnold pushed his vehicle up, his intent was to go about a block. I think he made it about a half a block. The world opened up. I mean, RPGs were flying. There were insurgents in building windows. There was, in fact, a sniper in that building, which Jeans killed with his 50 cal. He tore that building to pieces. Our vehicle started taking actual impacts from our direct front, which was right over Major Arnold's head. And at one point during all the shooting, I see him up there manning his 50 cal. And I guess it either ran out of ammo or there was a jam or something, but he reaches down inside of his vehicle in the turret, and he's shouldering his personal rifle against enemy personnel on the ground level down the street, which is what I'm shooting at as well. And the front of our vehicle starts taking round impacts, and I get on the hook and I tell Major Arm, like, hey, listen, you might want to get down because rounds are flying right over your head and they're hitting our vehicle. And I watched him drop like a sack of potatoes down into that turret. And I don't know how he did it, because he, you know, like all of us, he had on so much gear. You know, he's not a tiny dude. I don't know how he was able to drop through the turret like that immediately, but the fight continued. I heard him immediately back on the hook, continuing to direct our portion of this fight. Enemy insurgents were moving about 2 blocks away on the street level, poking around corners, firing at us, popping back. And the SIR's driver, Major Arnold's driver, is a kid at the time, Lance Corporal Bias. He eventually was promoted to corporal. But he and I were talking later, and he said that since he was the forward truck, he was able to count 17 RPGs flying in our direction, and certainly his truck's direction, before he just stopped counting. So it was a pretty thick fight. At one point, I had my armored door pushed open and I was using it as cover and firing around it. My driver, Matt Daniel, noticed something that I didn't notice because our truck was rocking from Chris Jeans's 50 cal, right? But rounds were impacting the door, and so it started to look like a golf ball. But I didn't notice because Jeans was moving our whole truck. Additionally, rounds were impacting all around my feet, and Daniel was screaming at me, "Hey, Sergeant Smith, get in the truck!" Because I'm so focused on what I'm doing, I don't realize that these rounds are actually hitting pretty close to me. So I'm glad he said that because all it would have taken was one round to clip my boot, and I would have fell down and gotten chewed up. So I hopped back in the truck, and it was about that time that I hopped back in the truck that we heard Major Arnold directing us to break contact. Um, we had put out enough fire on these on the bad guys that they eventually beat feet out of the area, and at that point, Major Arnold turned us around and we headed back to the mayor's complex. So for that being my first real firefight, it was interesting that again I was not scared. I was just really focused on doing my job and making sure that my guys were okay and that we were killing the enemy. Um, but once we got back to the mayor's complex and Major Arnold was off doing his thing with Colonel Shupp, I remember the guys were very euphoric and they were cheersing and high fiving each other, and that was great. I like to see my guys kind of celebrate their first action and the fact that they came out of it well. I remember sitting there quietly, just kind of watching them, thinking, thank God it went that way. It could have certainly gone, the opposite way, and we could have lost somebody. So we were very, very fortunate. I felt for that first fight.
Well, let's stay with this topic for a little bit as you reassess your time during the battle, which the kinetic phase lasted roughly 10, 12 days, and then this security and stability operations lasted for many, many more months. As you think back on your experience in Fallujah, what are two or three um, events that you consider to be most significant to your deployment, whether it be
Hmm.
tactically or strategically?
Well, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I think there was one fight that we got into one day that Major Arnold and Colonel Shupp had left, and they went, and I believe they were I think we were in 3-5's area, and they were linking up with the command element of 3-5 to ensure that they were doing what they needed to do. And while that took place, me and my just couple little scout vehicles here got basically surrounded on three sides by the enemy, and they really tried to take it to us. And I was very proud of my guys because we uh, dispatched a lot of bad guys that day who were hell bent on killing us. And it showed to me that we had really learned over the past while, coming from a completely green and untested unit to a fighting force capable of defending, and acting as essentially as our own security and maneuver element at the same time. So that was significant because I realized that we were growing at this point and we were learning. We were no longer green. We were kind of getting a little salty, and we were able to coordinate our response to this assault on our position really, really well, like seasoned professionals, not like we would have as a green unit when we first entered Iraq not too long prior. One of the other significant events that I remember very, very well was we participated in the security for the first free Iraqi election. And Colonel Shupp wanted to be moved to all the different polling sites. And of course, we took him there. And whichever one we were at, I think it was Brahma, call sign Brahma, uh, the first person to go in. And whoever's watching this might remember the purple ink on the thumb, right? Like once you voted, you dipped your thumb in the ink so you can, in an attempt to ward out voter fraud, right? Um, But an old lady was the first person that I saw walk in to the polling tent and vote. And why that's so hugely significant is in that culture, women are very, very much second class citizens. Um, you know, you would absolutely expect the first person to vote to be a man, right? And also the bravery that it took for this old woman to be the first person to walk up and vote was not only significant culturally, but the bad guys, the Mujahideen, they had put out word that anyone who votes in this election, their families are going to be targeted, they're going to be killed. So this woman was absolutely fearless, and that really stuck out to me as I'm witnessing something very cool in history take place.
Well, let's reflect on your experience for a moment. Well, before we do that, let's fast forward a little bit. The deployment has ended.
Okay.
It's now April 2005. Help us understand what it was like to leave Fallujah and return back to the United States.
It was
Help us understand that.
sure. So when you pare down your operational tempo, you conduct what's called a RIP, or a relief in place, right? And so the incoming guys that were going to take over our job when our tour was up and their tour was just beginning, we would teach them how to do the job, teach them things that we learned, teach them things that we learned we shouldn't do. We would put one of them in our vehicle, two in our vehicle at a time, and let them run around and run our missions with us. And when you do that, you start removing your own personnel because you only have so many seats in the vehicle, right? And so it really takes on this kind of surreal atmosphere, because now you're running these missions with these guys that you're trying to teach, but you don't know who they are. You don't know how they're going to react if something happens. And your guys are back in Camp Fallujah. Well, once that process is complete, you still feel surreal because now you're packing up gear to go home, and you haven't given home, or the thought of going home in a realistic way much of a thought. You think about home, you think about your loved ones, but you don't ever really think you're going to be one day packing your gear to go home. Like that concept just isn't there. Now you're really doing it. And as we transition back to the States, every emotion that you can think of has gone through your body. I mean, I'm sure every Marine was feeling this. There was joy, there was sadness, there was even a little bit of an emptiness, like you're leaving some major aspect of your life behind. And so I think once we were back in the States and you're seeing your family for the first time, it sounds strange, but it's odd. You're happy to see them, but they're almost foreign to you. And you're most certainly almost foreign to them because you've been apart for so long, and it's been a year of growth without your family and without you being with your family. And so it's a little bit of an awkward pause, I guess, when you first get home. And I think that's pretty common and has been throughout history of any deploying, person. So
Are you proud of your service?
absolutely. I think we did the job that we were assigned, we set out to do, and we did it well. Um, we learned that we could freaking kill the enemy when they wanted to play, but we could also assist in humanitarian type parts of the mission, like repopulating the city and keeping them safe from insurgents, and setting up humanitarian assistance sites where people could get food and water, and sort of helping facilitate those type of missions as well. So I think we did a really good job. Politics be damned, and the ultimate end of the war also be damned. I think our tiny little piece, and that's all we were. We weren't important. Um, we were just conducting our tiny little piece, and that tiny little piece was done well. So,
do you have any regrets?
um, I mean, I don't know. In a theoretical manner, could I have done things better? Could I have, interacted with my guys better? Could I have led them better? Certainly, anyone who's in any sort of leadership position has had that thought. But I think I did it good enough. So if there is any regret, it would be, could I have done it better? I mean, that's more of a question, right? Not necessarily a regret. I guess I don't have any regrets that I can think of.
Were you privy to any extraordinary examples of heroism, extraordinary examples of leadership that you've learned from? Um, any particular examples of inspiration that have helped you in your life since?
That's a tough one to narrow down to specifics, because you look around at the guys to your left and to your right every day, and you see examples of heroism, right? I mean, not something like Audie Murphy or something in a movie, but you see extreme bravery from kids, you know. I mean, constant clearing of houses, uh, you know, medevacing other wounded Marines back to, Bravo Surgical. I think everybody in Scout Platoon at some point has done something heroic. And I was so very proud of my guys that that's something that I've looked to pretty much every day. If you're talking about it affecting me later in life, of how proud I was of my guys and the job that they did, and the professional way that they went about doing these jobs in an extreme environment. I mean, they're 10 times the man that I am. And that has really served me well in life, just knowing the fantastic people that this country has living here and who are willing to step up. And also, I've made lifelong friendships with many of these people that I value unbelievably to this day. So,
Have you told them what you think about them?
I have many of them. My fiance and I started a Scout Platoon reunion 16 or so years too late, but we finally got it going, and we've had 2 years of reunions so far. And you talk to a lot of people at these reunions, and there's a lot of course, reminiscing of, you remember this and you remember that, but there's a lot of coming together as men now who are adults and with families, and you're no longer under a rank structure, right? You're just citizens, fellow citizens. And outside of those reunions, like I said, I've made lifelong relationships and friendships with many of these guys, and we talk on the phone regularly, text, go visit each other, and I always try to each time that I hang out with one of these guys, let them know how much they meant to me and what a good job they did, and whether they're going to listen to me or not, I don't know, but I try to make sure that they know I'm super proud of them. So,
Yeah. Well, let's talk about life since you returned. Do you feel like you were accepted back into American society once you returned?
I think my return's been pretty typical. Um, in the jobs that I've had since, they're very, very veteran heavy. I mean, working in law enforcement, a lot of vets work in law enforcement, right? And so we talk all the time. And the one thing that you always hear is, thank you for your service. Well, that on its face is accepting you back into society. That's very nice, and it's very well appreciated. But many, many times to many of us, it seems very hollow. It's almost the in vogue thing to do, like, oh, it's a vet, thank him for his service. But myself and many of my colleagues, it's kind of lip service. And it's almost as if nothing changed back home when so much changed for us over there. So while I'm not saying that it's been adversarial when I've come back and then tried to reintegrate into society, it feels like everyone back here didn't miss a beat, and we were given a whole bunch of our time and sweat and tears over there, and everyone here is still, going to McDonald's and watching TV. Like, what we were going through didn't matter. So there is an undercurrent of that. I also had one lovely lady call me a baby killer, which was absolutely hilarious because I think she's a few generations too late because that was the Vietnam era, but that happened. So I feel generally accepted, but I don't know that America really like. It's not like, I guess what I'm trying to say. It's not like World War II where everyone quit their job and worked at a munitions factory. Everyone went and signed up to go serve. I mean, it was a homogenous society back then, all centered on the war effort. Now it was just the guys and gals who were in the military, and of course, families were affected, but they say only 1% of people currently serve in the military. So that other 99% to me seems almost wholly unaffected by the fact that we were at war.
Well, it's been 20 years since your return,
Right.
almost 18 years since you returned to the United States. How do your war experiences continue to affect your life?
Well, in positive ways and in negative ways, right? Like there are times when I have the proverbial nightmares, that you hear about people talking about in the movies. That's a real thing. I've had some crazy nightmares that have really bothered me. And so there's some element of the mental toll that real combat will take on a person, right? But not everything is a rainy day and a stormy cloud. Like, there is positive things that come out of it. I ended up at a VFW, which is where I met my fiance. I would have never have been there if I wasn't a combat vet, right? I went there for a function, and met this wonderful young lady who is now stuck with me. Huh? So there's positive and there's negative to to my service. But one thing is for clear, it has changed me for good and for bad. But it is something that I'm very proud of, and I would do it over again, I believe.
Would you recommend that your children serve in the military?
So many people ask me that question, and that's a tough one. As a parent, you don't want your kid to ever be in harm's way. I mean, that's just logical. But my service in the Marine Corps and the men that I served with is what defines me in a way. And it's so important to me and so special to me that I would, in a way, want my kids to have that experience, for them to be built by that experience. But also at the same time, when I joined the Marine Corps, I didn't choose to go to Iraq and I didn't choose to go to Fallujah because I was a Marine. I was told to go and that was my job, so I went. Uh, there are problems that I see with this nation now that weren't there when I joined the Marine Corps. As societal rifts everywhere. So I would be hard pressed to be able to look you straight in the eye and tell you that I would join the Marine Corps again. So so the question is, would I do it over again and would I recommend it to my kids? The answer is I would absolutely do it over again under my circumstances. Join when I joined, when society was the way society was. Is America today in its current concept, and I'm not saying it can't change, but in its current concept, something that I would sign up for, put my name on the line? I don't know. And so I say all that as background to tell you I don't know how I can answer that question about the children, because unless America unscrews itself, to use a little bit letter language, I don't know that I would recommend that my kid fight for a nation that's pulling itself apart and at odds so much with itself. I mean, our biggest enemies are people that hate us in our own countries. Why would you risk your life for that? So it's kind of a hard one to answer.
Yeah. Well, we just have a moment or two to conclude this interview. What's the last thing you'd like to say? What's a question I haven't asked that you wish I had?
I don't know. It's been a pretty comprehensive interview. I feel like. Um, I don't know. I think the well. Hmm, so you've stumped me. I guess just I would say that it's not really a question, but what you're doing with this project and how you're tying all these pieces together and various different interviews, I think is important, uh, because you're getting different viewpoints on the same battle, right? And not just the same battle, but the effects that it has on loved ones at homes. I mean, I think what's going on is a really neat project. So I don't know that you didn't ask me. There's a question that I wanted you to ask me that you didn't, but I think maybe, tying all of this together with the other interviews that you've done would be a sort of an important thing. So they're not standalone interviews, right? Like, I don't know how you're going to do that, but how you're going to make them all come together would be, interesting to see. So I don't really think there's anything missing from my standpoint, I guess. So
Well, thank you for your time.
yeah,
Thank you for your service. God bless.
thank you.